So, with Rabbi being out, I decided I was going to throw in some of my stuff that he wouldn't necessarily talk about. I mean, you know, he doesn't talk much about Star Trek. I don't know why. So, we're going to get there, but let me just start out with this. You know, we've been talking about the biblical festivals, right? Rabbi's been doing a series on the biblical festivals, and it's been wonderful. But for some reason, he hasn't mentioned this one coming up. He hasn't mentioned this thing called Hanukkah, okay? So the question we need to figure out is, one, is Hanukkah biblical? And if so, why have we mentioned it? And if it's not, why are we doing it, right? And the second question probably is, why should we, as followers of Yeshua, want to participate in Hanukkah? And better yet, which leads us to our topic at hand, what do Hanukkah and Star Trek have in common? Okay? So if you have watched Star Trek at any length, and I know Dr. David's going to geek out, but you know, just put him to the side, and he and I will go after service. We'll dialogue. But you know, if you've heard it, if you've watched a few episodes of Star Trek, you've heard the phrase most likely, resistance is futile. Have you heard that? Resistance is futile. Okay, and who says that? The Borg. Okay, what is the Borg? Okay, it's a conglomerate cyborg species that's bent on universal conquest. Okay, there's these people, or I don't know if people is the right word. Okay, but they are cyborg. They're half machine, half humanoid. We'll just put it that way. Okay, Star Trek universe, you can't just say human. And so, and they are a conglomeration. They're mixed between these two. And so you have these weird-looking figures and all that kind of stuff, weird creature-looking. They're cyborgs. And their goal for their existence is to go out, find other civilizations, other races in the universe, and then basically subjugate them and make them in their own image, right? Assimilate, that's the word, okay? Their job is to assimilate entire planets, okay? That's what the Borg is. And little did, I just went blank, the guy who wrote Star Trek. Gene Roddenberry. Little did Gene Roddenberry know when he wrote about the Borg that he was going to be giving a metaphor for Hanukkah, okay? And so let's work this in here. As a species as a whole, the Borg, they loathe individualism. They don't like individual identity. Let's put it that way. As a matter of fact, they refer to them as the collective and don't refer to any individual members by names. And by the way, I'm really sorry. I apologize in advance. I think only 7 of 9 people watching this are probably going to understand of it. The Trekkies got that. They give each Borg its own designation instead of a name. So it's a number within a collective, okay? And so hence the 7 of 9 reference a while ago. It's the name of one of the characters. And they don't even allow individual thought, okay? They've got this brain implant in which that makes them where they actually hear the others in what's called the hive. And so they have this hive mentality, hive mind, okay? And so their thoughts, anything that they're thinking, the others can sense and the others can pick up on, the others can hear. Anything that they think about, whatever, see, interact with, and so forth, sensory input and all that kind of stuff, the others feel, hear, and experience as well, okay? So they have this total disdain for individuality. They look like, the people who are assimilated, they look like Borg, they act like Borg, they dress like Borg, and even think like the Borg from that point forward. And assimilation to being a Borg is virtually impossible to reverse engineer. Basically, once you become a Borg, there's pretty much no going back unless you're Picard. Resistance for most is indeed futile. Okay? So why all the talk about this? What does any of this have to do with Hanukkah? What does this have to do with Torah? What does it have to do with Yeshua? Okay? This is, like I said, could be very well an allegory for the Hanukkah story. Because, as we will talk about more in just a second, this is exactly what the antagonist of the Hanukkah story wanted to create. He wanted to create a world in which people did not have their individuality. They all would be like him and his people, the Seleucid Greeks, okay? They would worship the same gods. They would eat the same foods. They would, celebrate in the same way. They all this kind of stuff. And so this is the problem that came up. And when God established the nation of Israel, that wasn't his plan for his people. His plan was not for them to be like everyone else. His plan was for them to be what's called holy, to be unique, to be special, to be set apart. And so if you'd like to look up some time, I'm going to give you some brief references that you can go back and look up at your own leisure. But pretty much the story of Hanukkah is foretold in the prophecies by Daniel. In Daniel 2, we read of Nebuchadnezzar's dream, and this is a snippet from verse 32 and 33. It says, "The head of this image was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its middle and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay." Now, you guys are probably familiar with this image, right? Probably learned about it growing up. And these parts of this image represent world powers that would be following on the heels of the Babylonian Empire. So the head of gold was the Babylonian Empire itself. The arms and chest of silver was the Medo-Persian Empire. And the thighs of bronze was the Greek Empire. And the legs of iron and feet of clay became the Roman Empire. So you can see that progression as time goes on there. And Daniel 11 foretells the entire events from before Alexander the Great until the time of the Maccabees, okay? Daniel 8, it sets the stage for the awful events that would one day take place during the time of the Maccabees. Like I said, I don't have time to go into all this detail, but you can read about these prophecies in the book of Daniel and then compare them. Go find a copy of First Maccabees. I've got it actually in my book here. It's printed in the back. Read the First Maccabees, and you can just see these things lining up, okay? Here's a brief history. In 168 BCE, Antiochus IV, who called himself Antiochus Epiphanes, which means basically God incarnate, he came onto the stage in a way that affected Israel in a very challenging way. Now, he was crazy. He was a madman, and so therefore people gave him the epithet of Antiochus Epiphanes, okay, which means lunatic or madman. So play on words there. He wasn't the God he thought he was. He was the lunatic, right? And so he was returning from his failed campaign in Egypt. He went down to Egypt and said, "Hey, you guys, we're going to kick your tails, and you're going to join us, and we're going to dominate your land," and all that kind of stuff. And he got slapped on the wrist by some higher-ups and was told to withdraw his troops. And so he had to come back, and when he did so, he was coming back through the land of Canaan there, the land of Israel as it is, and there was a Jewish revolt happening, and he was already in a foul mood from having to stop what he was doing and get slapped on the wrist. And so when he came through, that just gave him an excuse to sack Jerusalem. And so he brutalized the people. He destroyed a bunch of stuff. He slaughtered 40,000 people and put another 40,000 into slavery, sold them into slavery. This is the kind of guy he is. Nice guy. You want to have at a party, right? So they thought they were done. They thought this is over. This guy's out of our hair. We're okay. But 2 years later, he came back and said, there was a problem. Let's make peace. Let's smooth everything over. And he came under the pretenses of peace. But then they opened their gates again, and he ransacked it again. This time, however, he proclaimed that Judaism would not be tolerated on any level. Judaism within Israel would not be tolerated on any level. On the 15th of Kislev, an idol was set up in the temple. Bless you, sir. Pardon me. And on the 25th of Kislev, the altar was defiled with idolatrous sacrifices and the pouring out of pig's blood all over the altar. Then he decided he was going to burn the Torah scrolls, and then he specifically forbade circumcision, he forbade Sabbath observance, and he forbade any kind of kosher eating, okay? And the problem was, this came right on the heels of a wave of Hellenism that had come across Israel in the recent years at that time. So if you're familiar with Hellenism, you see the problem. If you're not, let me just explain that real quick. Hellenism takes its name from, of course, Helen, Queen Helen. It's the promulgation of Greek culture. And this is where the Greeks began influencing societies and civilizations and everything. And so people wanted to become more like the Greeks. The Greeks were the cool kids. And so they wanted to dress like them, act like them, party like them, and so forth. And so there were a lot, unfortunately, in Israel that adopted Greek culture. They even went so far as to take Greek names and so forth. I mean, even we had a high priest, or at least one high priest, I'm sure probably more, that used their Greek name, okay? Because they were so indoctrinated by Greek culture, that was the thing to do. And so this was at a time when Antiochus came and did all this stuff. It was at basically the perfect storm, where the people of Israel, there was a clash between the cultures. We had part of Israel wanting to throw him out, kick him out, overturn him, preserve the ways of Hashem. We had another half that was like, hey, let's just do this. Let's get it over with. This is good anyway. Let's just do what they want to do, become like them. Everybody's going to be okay, right? Let's assimilate. So I would imagine, well, let me say this real quick. So Antiochus sent officers into towns across the nation to set up idols and have prominent and influential men of the town offer sacrifices and eat the pork chops on the altar in front of everyone, okay? I imagine the conversation going something like this. Are you some kind of weirdo? Did God really say? It's not a big deal. It's just a piece of meat, a really tasty piece of meat at that. It's not about all this legalism. Just try it. You'll like it. Or, hey, you don't have to literally keep those ritual commandments. Just keep them in your heart. Or, why do you want to be so weird? Why do you want to be so different than everybody else? Stick out like a sore thumb. You're always saying you can't do this and you can't do that. You're such a party pooper. Or, come on over to my house this Saturday. We're going to have some baby back ribs. Why don't you pick up some coleslaw on the way? Okay? Just my little attempt at humor there. And so what happened after that is finally somebody stood up to this. Finally somebody got fed up with it. Finally somebody had a backbone and stood up to the problem that was happening. An older gentleman who was a Cohen, a priest. He was part of the Hasmonean family line. He was the priest in a town called Modin. You may have heard his name, Mattathias, or Mattatyahu, or Matthew, or more famously, Mattisyahu. Now, he sings some really good stuff, but he's been around a long time. Nobody's getting my jokes. Matisyahu. Okay. We'll have to culture you guys some music. I was culturing my young adults last night on the way. Sabrina and I were culturing them in the car. Some old school Christian rock. So Matisyahu, he decided that he wasn't going to stand for this anymore. So what did he do? They were just about to have this person who had volunteered to come sacrifice on this makeshift altar and then eat the pig's flesh right in front of everybody. And Matisyahu, he says, no, we're not going to have this. And he said, basically, he ran first, drew his sword, he slayed his fellow Jew, and then slayed the officers that were attending the event. And then he said, all who are for God and the Torah, follow me. And they ran and they hid out in the mountains, and they began to establish this guerrilla warfare against this mighty army, okay? Him and his 5 sons. Now, his 5 sons, I don't even know the rest of their names. I could look them up, but you probably know this particular one, that his name is Judah MC Hammer, right? No, his name is Judah Maccabee. Maccabee means the hammer. I don't know if you realize that. Maccabee means the hammer. And he was nicknamed that because he became a great military leader after his father died. And he would run in and he would hammer the enemy and he would run out. And he led this small band of guerrilla soldiers, guerrilla warfare against these guys. You may even call them sort of almost terrorists, but they were defending themselves in their own land. But they became so well-trained in what they did that they could defeat 10 times their number, just a small group of the people. And the beauty of what they were doing and how they were doing it is because they would call on heaven for their strength. At the beginning of every battle, before the battle started, Judah Maccabee would call to heaven. He would gather everyone up and have a prayer of dedication that this battle belongs to the Lord. And that if it's your will that these pagans be thrust out of the land and your Torah be restored and your temple be restored, then let us succeed. Pardon me. So Judah leads his men, and they finally gain control again over the Temple Mount, and they begin repairing and cleaning the temple, including completely removing the defiled altar and replacing it with a totally new one made of unhewn stones, okay? And then, once this was complete, they rededicated this altar, and they rededicated it exactly 1 year from the time it was defiled. And this rededication we now know as Hanukkah, or the Feast of Dedication. Pardon me. Because the word Hanukkah means dedication. And so what they were doing was dedicating this new altar and this new temple for the renewed service of the Almighty in Israel. And as the story goes, they were going to light the menorah, and they only had 1 cruse of oil with the high priest signet on it with the seal, and that would only last 1 day. And so they decided, hey, it's better to start something than not start at all. It's better to do something than not do something. So we're going to use it, and if it lasts 1 day, it'll last 1 day. If it lasts more than that, we'll be blessed, right? So they used the cruse of oil, lit it, and miraculously it lasted not just 1 day, not just 2 days, not just 3 days, but it lasted all 8 days of the dedication festivities and ceremony, okay? Why 8 days? 7 is the number of completion, right? And we have 7 days of the week and so forth. 8 is the number of new beginnings. And this was a new beginning for the Holy Temple and all that it entailed. And so because of these events, we remember them in a number of ways during the 8 nights of Hanukkah. We light candles. We recite blessings every night. We include the Al-Hanisim prayer in our daily prayers and in our after meals prayers. Okay? This is for the miracle. That's what it means. Al Hanisim means for the miracles. And then we recite the Hallel, which is Psalm 113 through Psalm 118, every day during our prayers of Hanukkah. And we do not fast or eulogize during Hanukkah. That was a sort of a new one that I'd not really paid attention to in the past. But we don't do this because this is a time of festivity. It's a time of rejoicing. It's a time of being thankful for what Hashem has done. I came across a few years back this letter from the Lubavitcher Rebbe to his followers. And I pulled this one piece because I thought it was so good that it would help us to get a focus on our responsibility of what we're doing, okay, when we celebrate Hanukkah and so forth. He says this: the Hanukkah lights remind us in a most obvious way that illumination begins at home, within ourselves and one's family. By increasing and intensifying the light of the Torah and the mitzvot, the commandments, in the everyday experience, even as the Hanukkah candles are kindled in growing numbers from day to day. So if you're not familiar, the Hanukkah candles, there's a total of 8 plus the shamash, the servant candle. And instead of starting with 8 candles and diminishing them through the 8 days, we actually increase the light each of the nights. We start with 1 and then 2 and then 3 and build up. So we have a full blazing Hanukkah menorah, Hanukkah. But though it begins at home, it does not stop there. Such is the nature of light, that when one kindles a light for one's own benefit, it benefits also all who are in the vicinity. Does that ring any bells? Does that sound like something somebody else may have said similar? You are the light of the world, right? You put your candle, your menorah, on a stand. Indeed, the Hanukkah lights are expressly meant to illuminate the outside, symbolically alluding to the duty to bring light also to those who are, for one reason or another, still walk in darkness. So you guys know my wife. Most of you guys know Sabrina. And she loves Hanukkah. She tells me every year, because it's her yearly inoculation against assimilation. Okay, we have lots of talk about inoculations and all that kind of stuff. But this is our inoculation against assimilation. Hanukkah is a shot in the arm. It's a cry for us to wake up and realize that we are the frog in the kettle, and the temperature is only rising. When we look around, we may not see it unless we have that jolt to wake us up, because we're slumbering. When we light the Hanukkah, we're supposed to set them in the window for people to see from outside. And this is symbolic of what we should be doing with our lives as well. When we set ourselves in the window, nearest the incoming darkness, we accomplish 2 purposes. The first is we work to push aside the darkness with just a small bit of light that's coming from within each one of us. And as I alluded to earlier, Yeshua taught his disciples, you are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket and on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. And so in the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good theology. And I quoted that wrong, sorry. They may see your good works, right? And give glory to your fathers in heaven. There's a saying that says that we judge other people based on their actions, but we judge ourselves based on our intentions. Unfortunately, nobody can see our intentions, so they can only see our works. They can only see our actions. And that's why our actions are so important, because they reflect what's truly in our hearts and the origin of where that's coming from. And secondly, second purpose is we give hope to other lonely candles struggling to maintain their light as well. We give them the courage to face the darkness and resist assimilation with their own small light. One flickering candle in a window will not dispel the darkness. I mean, I don't know if you guys realize that or not. This, deep thought there, but neither is it as susceptible to assimilation when it's surrounded by other flames. When we each set our light in the window, the darkness will be diminished by our own candles. They will bring light to all who see it. So back to my connection at the beginning here, the Borg have no power over us when we stick together. When we're together, we'll be able to stand tall and proud in the face of darkness that's rushing from us at every angle. We'll have no need to cower in pursuit of a life of holiness. This Hanukkah, my challenge to you is place your Hanukkah in the window, light your candles, recite your blessings, and that remember you're shining your light not just physically, but metaphorically and spiritually as well on those around you through your actions. Your actions of physically lighting that candle, your actions of physically going over and helping your neighbor or doing this or that or whatever. Those affect the people around you. Because there are those around you, and unfortunately I'm one of them sometime with my perspective that needs shifting. There are people around us that can only see darkness and assimilation at every turn. The Borg are real, in a manner of speaking. And by shining your light, you'll never know what an impact it will have on those struggling to see beyond the consuming darkness of winter's long night. We can only overcome the influences of this dark world by joining our light with others. And the good news is this is something the enemy, the Borg, doesn't want us to know. Resistance really isn't futile when we work together. So shine your light brightly. You never know if you'll be able to be the one to inspire a spiritual revolution against the Borg.